I'm thrilled this evening to have as my guest Jim Floyd. If you don't know the name Jim Floyd, then you probably haven't been in Mercer County for the past 80 or so years. Jim Floyd is a mentor, an advocate, a philanthropist, and basically a defender of what's right with the human spirit. Jim, welcome to WIMG.
Bill, thank you so much.
Jim, you've been an inexhaustible voice for people throughout the community. And I want to take you back to your early days here in Trenton. You were born and raised here, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And tell me about being born and raised and what Trenton was like back in the day.
Well, let me surprise you a bit. I was born in 1922 in the industrial section of Trenton that's known as East Trenton. And in those days, there were at least 10 or 12 factories around the street that I was born on. My mother was originally from Georgia. Her father, my grandfather, was a minister. My dad was kind of an early, not an entrepreneur, but he was a go-getter. My dad was involved very much in the church in Trenton. He was also involved in organizing politically in Trenton. And I guess a bit of that rubbed off on me.
Well, I should say so. For those who don't know, Jim served as the mayor of Princeton Township. And Jim, that must have been a very interesting time in your life.
It was a real honor. I first served on township committee and then served as mayor. My term was cut a bit short because I was promoted with my job and I had to transfer to Cleveland. So it was a little difficult to commute and be a mayor in Princeton Township, but I loved it.
Speaking of Cleveland, let me throw three names at you. One is Tom Bradley. One is R.O.W. Wilson Good, and the other is Carl Stokes. Do you know what those three have in common?
Yes, they're all my fraternity brothers.
They're all your fraternity brothers. They're all Kappas.
And I met them all, and I've been on some programs with some of them.
And they were all mayors of cities.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be getting into talking about Kappa Alpha Psi and the founding of the Trenton Alumni Chapter that you were intimately involved with. 1942. Let's go back there. Let's go back to the Trenton Area Chapter. Is that when?
The Trenton Area Alumni Chapter was chartered in 1949. I was initiated in 1942 at West Virginia State College, and I was initiated by a gentleman who's internationally known by the name of Leon Sullivan.
Oh,
Leon
the
Sullivan,
Reverend Leon Sullivan.
The Reverend Leon Sullivan.
Economic Opportunities in Philadelphia.
He wrote the Sullivan Principles.
Absolutely.
That became the guidelines for American corporations who were investing in South Africa. Well, Leon and I were very good friends. In fact, the first province council we had in Trenton, I convinced Leon to come and be our guest speaker. But I've been a Kappa since 1942. And we organized the Trenton Alumni Chapter in 1949. And prior to getting our charter, we kind of worked together as a group. We didn't have a charter. We attended province council meetings, and we started our outreach work in and around the city of Trenton.
Let's talk about that outreach work, because I know that's blossomed nationally to such mentoring programs as Guide Right. But why don't you talk a little bit about what you've done throughout the city and throughout the region?
Surely, I'd love to talk about that. You mentioned Guide Right. Guide Right is a national program. There is an expectancy that each chapter in the fraternity should have a guide. Each alumni chapter should have a Guide Right program. We have a wonderful Guide Right program under our president, Brother George, Harold George, and we have some of our mentees have come back to serve as mentors for their younger brothers.
I think it's what the young folk call paying it forward.
Well, that's true. That's true. And it's really rewarding. I, for one, have always had that interest in our Guide Right program. In fact, some awards that I've received at the province level had related to our local Guide Right program. And I'm just happy to see that the current members of the fraternity are carrying on with that. It means so much to young folks. My mantra is you can talk and teach but role models are really the best way to motivate youngsters. It's easy to be a critic, but try to be a role model, and you can be much more influential with a young person.
You've met some famous people along the way, Thurgood Marshall and others. Who are some of the? And you're not a person to name drop, but I'm sure our listeners would like to know some of the influential people who have influenced your life, who you've met along the way.
Well, late in his life, I met Paul Robeson when I moved to Princeton. In fact, my in-laws were friendly with Paul and Paul's father. Paul's father used to be the minister up at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, where I attend. And I had the pleasure of meeting Paul. And I had the pleasure, among a few others, I guess, who met Martin Luther King. He spoke at the chapel. And a person of equal importance really brought Martin Luther King there. It was Dean Gordon, who was dean of the chapel then. And he was among those British troops who were captured by the Japanese and were forced to build the River Kwai. Well, Dean Gordon was a very sensitive person regarding relationships between people. And I met Dean Gordon and did a little bit of work with Dean Gordon at the chapel. And there are others who've, Adam Clayton Powell, whom I've met. And as you indicated earlier, I had the privilege of meeting Thurgood Marshall. And along the way, those were folk of significant importance in the scheme of the world. And, of course, I've met an awful lot of my jazz musicians who were the Dizzy Gillespies and Jimmy Lunsford and Duke Ellington. And
did you meet Sidney Bechet?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
He was to me the greatest tenor sax.
Well, I'll tell you. You know, it's difficult for me to single out, musicians who were the best, but I usually say when you're at that level, everybody's among the best, and they are good. I met several jazz musicians, met them either at the New Orleans Jazz Festival or on the jazz cruise that we used to go on each year. And the jazz cruise was really an intimate interface you would have, because every day there was a session known as Meet the Musicians, and they would just talk about their life and what they went through. Oh, I also met Billie Holiday many years ago. And, of course, people like Sarah Vaughan and Billy Eckstein and others.
When you think about the impact that you've had on the Trenton Alumni Chapter of Kappa and the impact that Kappa has had on the communities that Kappa members serve, what kinds of things would you like to say now to parents who may be having a child who would be going to college or who's in college about why Kappa might be something interesting for them to look into?
Yeah, let me then refer to my experience early on. I joined Kappa because of men like Leon Sullivan, because of the registrar and the dean. They were Kappa men. And while they, kind of respected the guys for being good athletes and good socializers, I'll tell you, when the marking period came out, they looked over our grades and said, this ain't going to cut it. You've got to do better than that. And I would urge, really, a young man and a young woman, if she's interested in a sorority, to look at those who have come before her and who may be her mentors, and look at what their sense of values are. And if those sense of values are consistent with yours, someone you admire in that context, try to find a way to make the association. Now, they will weed you out if you don't meet their criteria as well.
What a great way to end our conversation. And that's great advice for parents of children who are going to go to college, to look into service organizations that can help them grow. And for parents in Trenton, if you have younger children, I want to let you know that Children's Futures has just opened up its newest Parent Center at 16 West Front Street on the second floor at Suite 220. If you'd like to find more information about how to read to your child, how to best discipline your child, how to understand the ages and stages of your child's development, give us a call at Children's Future.